My sister looked me dead in the eye in the middle of a crowded restaurant and told me the greatest wedding gift I could ever give her was to disappear from this family forever. My mother looked away. My father nodded in agreement. So, I did exactly that. But after selling the house out from under them and canceling every single wedding vendor, what I left sitting in the middle of their empty dining room completely shattered their world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Gwen, 33 years old, and working as a senior financial auditor in Chicago. I thought I had learned to navigate the toxic dynamics of my family, but nothing could have prepared me for the tasting dinner for my younger sister's upcoming wedding. We were sitting in a private alcove at one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. The table was covered in half-eaten plates of Wagyu beef, imported truffles, and empty bottles of vintage champagne. Savannah, my 29-year-old sister, was glowing with the smug satisfaction she wore so well. She had just finished a lengthy speech about the intricate details of her perfect wedding. Her fiancé Trey, a brilliant software sales director who was African American, and one of the most genuinely hardworking men I had ever met, had stepped away to take an urgent phone call from a client. He was completely blind to the financial toxicity that ran deep in my family, that left just my parents, Savannah, and me at the table. That is when the waiter approached holding a black leather folder. He bypassed my father, Thomas, who was busy swirling the last drop of a $200 wine in his glass, and placed the folder directly in front of me. I opened the folder. The total at the bottom of the receipt read $4,500. I stared at the numbers, letting the absolute absurdity of the moment sink in. $4,500 for a single meal. I looked across the table at my mother, Brenda. Her perfectly highlighted hair caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us as she casually adjusted her diamond earrings. She did not even blink. "Go ahead and put your card down, Gwen," she said smoothly, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. "Savannah needs to save her money right now. She and Trey are finalizing their honeymoon suite in Bora Bora, and those overwater bungalows are outrageously expensive. Family helps family. You know that." I closed the leather folder and pushed it slowly toward the center of the table. "I am not paying for this," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "I came here tonight to taste the menu, not to foot the bill for a private feast that I did not even order." My father slammed his hand flat against the heavy mahogany table, making the silverware rattle loudly. "Do not start this right now, Gwen," he warned, his voice low and threatening. "You have a fantastic salary as an auditor. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. Paying for a celebration dinner is the least you can do to support your sister. No real responsibilities," I repeated, feeling the familiar cold anger pooling in my chest. "You mean, aside from the $15,000 venue deposit I paid just last month because Savannah claimed her credit cards were completely maxed out, or the florist retainer she begged me to cover 2 weeks ago because she absolutely needed imported orchids, I have funded half this wedding already while you and Mom have contributed absolutely nothing but opinions," Savannah scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically as she crossed her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "You are a financial auditor, Gwen. You literally look at spreadsheets and bank accounts all day long. You make 6 figures and do absolutely nothing with your money. It is just a dinner. Stop acting like we are bankrupting you. You are making yourself look so cheap, and it is honestly embarrassing to watch." My mother leaned forward, her voice taking on that toxic, condescending tone she had perfected over 3 decades of making me the family scapegoat. "Savannah is the bride. This is her time to shine, and you are trying to ruin it with your usual negativity. You should be honored that we even invited you to share this luxury experience. It is not our fault you are 33 and single. Do not take your bitter jealousy out on your sister, just because she is building a beautiful, successful life with a wonderful man, and you are entirely alone." I looked at the 3 of them, the people who had spent my entire life taking my money, my time, and my sanity, all while treating me like a walking automated teller machine that doubled as an emotional punching bag. Every accomplishment of mine was ignored. Ignored, while every extravagant whim of Sava's was funded by my hard work and quiet sacrifices. I reached into my designer purse, but instead of pulling out my premium credit card, I pulled out my car keys. I gripped the cool metal tightly in my palm, feeling the sharp edges press against my skin. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said calmly, rising from my chair and looking down at them. "Savannah is the bride, so the bride and her generous parents can figure out how to pay for their own imported truffles. Have a lovely evening." Savannah's face turned a violent shade of red. She shot up from her seat so fast that her elbow clipped her crystal champagne flute. The glass shattered violently against the table, sending expensive champagne pouring over the white linen tablecloth and splashing directly onto my mother's designer dress. The sharp, explosive sound of breaking glass echoed loudly through the quiet restaurant. Conversations at nearby tables stopped instantly, as dozens of affluent patrons turned their heads to stare at our private alcove. Savannah did not care about the audience. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger mere inches from my face, her chest heaving with uncontrolled rage as she glared at me. "You are a miserable, bitter spinster who cannot stand to see anyone else happy." Savannah hissed her voice vibrating with malice that cut through the sudden silence of the dining room. "You think just because you have a boring corporate job and some money saved up, you can control me? You think you can hold a few venue deposits over my head and suddenly play the victim? Let me make something crystal clear for you, Gwen. The only reason we even invite you to these things is because Mom and Dad feel sorry for you. But if you want to know what I really want," she leaned in closer, her eyes flashing with absolute venom. "The greatest wedding gift is for you to disappear from this family forever." The words hung in the chilling air between us. The surrounding tables were completely quiet now, every patron pretending to look at their menus while hanging on to every syllable of my sister's tantrum. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Savannah. Instead, I slowly turned my gaze to our mother. I waited for Brenda to do what any normal mother would do. I waited for her to scold Savannah for the outburst, to tell her that she had gone too far, to insist that family does not speak to family that way. But Brenda did none of those things. My mother simply reached for her cloth napkin, dabbed at the spilled champagne on her dress, and deliberately turned her head away. Refusing to look at me, she stared blankly at a painting on the far wall, completely abandoning me to Savannah's cruelty, just as she had done my entire life. I shifted my gaze to my father, the patriarch, who always demanded respect and unity. Thomas let out a heavy sigh, adjusting his suit jacket with a look of profound irritation. He did not look angry at Savannah for her vicious words. He looked angry at me for provoking her. "Gwen, just stop ruining your sister's mood," he muttered, shaking his head. "Savannah has been under a tremendous amount of stress planning this wedding. She does not need your attitude tonight. Just pay the bill and let us salvage what is left of this evening. You are acting incredibly immature." I stood there for a long moment. A younger version of me would have crumbled. A younger version of me would have felt the familiar hot sting of tears welling up in my eyes, desperate for their approval, desperate to apologize just to restore the peace. I would have begged them to love me, handing over my credit card while swallowing my pride, just to avoid being cast out. But standing in that upscale restaurant, looking at the three people who shared my blood but possessed none of my loyalty, I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional well had finally run dry. There was no sadness left, no rejection to fear. Savannah had just handed me the exact permission I needed to execute a plan I had been holding back on for years. They wanted me to disappear. They thought my absence would be a punishment, a tragic exile, for the lonely, unloved older sister. They had no idea that my disappearance would be the catalyst for their absolute financial ruin. I reached back into my designer purse. I did not pull out a tissue to wipe away non-existent tears. I pulled out my sleek, heavy metal premium credit card. I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight, the tangible proof of the success I had built entirely on my own, while they mocked my career choices. I placed the card down on the leather check presenter with a sharp, definitive clack that echoed over the table. The waiter, who had been hovering nervously near a pillar, hurried over to process the transaction. I did not say a word as he swiped it, handed me the receipt, and offered a sympathetic nod. I signed my name with a steady hand, leaving a generous tip for the staff who had to endure my family's disgraceful behavior. I picked up my purse and looked back at my family one last time. Savannah was already smiling, victorious. Believing she had put me back in my proper place as the obedient family wallet, Brenda finally looked at me, a smug expression settling on her features now that the bill was covered. Thomas went back to his wine, satisfied that order had been restored. I looked Savannah dead in the eye. My voice was calm, devoid of any anger or malice, carrying only the chilling certainty of a promise. "Your wedding gift will be delivered exactly as requested," I said. Before any of them could respond or process the finality in my tone, I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not rush. I walked through the elegant dining room with my head held high, my posture straight, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the Chicago night. The city was alive with flashing lights, the roar of traffic, and the distant sound of sirens, but my mind was completely silent, focused entirely on the immediate future. I walked to the valet stand, handed over my ticket, and waited for my luxury sedan. When the attendant brought my car around, I tipped him generously, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet sanctuary of the leather interior. I sat there in the parking lot with the engine running. I did not rest my head against the steering wheel to cry. I did not call a friend to vent about the betrayal. I did not need comfort. I needed execution. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the car. I swiped past my text messages, past the family group chat that I would soon delete entirely, and bypassed my social media apps. Instead, I opened a heavily encrypted folder on my home screen. It required a facial recognition scan and a complex passcode to unlock. The app loaded, displaying a highly confidential real estate portfolio. This was my hidden empire, the secret wealth I had meticulously built and managed entirely out of sight from my greedy, entitled family. I tapped on the primary property listing, a massive, beautiful suburban estate located in a highly desirable neighborhood, the exact estate my parents currently lived in. The exact estate they believed was their lifelong home. My finger hovered over the contact button for my exclusive corporate real estate broker, preparing to set off an explosion that would burn their perfect, arrogant lives completely to the ground. I pressed the contact button, sending an encrypted message to my broker. The instructions were simple: prepare liquidation documents for the suburban estate. I will initiate an expedited cash sale tomorrow morning. I locked my phone and pulled out of the parking lot. The drive back took 40 minutes, giving me time to appreciate the silence. I felt no guilt, no anxiety, and no desire to fix the relationships I was leaving behind. Savannah demanded I disappear. I would grant her wish with surgical precision. I turned onto our street and pulled into the sprawling driveway. The property boasted a main house, manicured gardens, and a detached guest house. That guest house was my sanctuary for 6 years. I lived quietly out of their way while they lived like royalty. I parked near my spot, stepping into the cool night air. I just wanted to pack a bag and head to my downtown penthouse to begin the final phase. Before I could reach into my keys, harsh headlights washed over the driveway. My parents' luxury sport utility vehicle pulled in fast, braking sharply inches from my bumper. The heavy doors swung open. Thomas and Brenda stepped out, faces illuminated by the security lights I had installed 2 years ago. They evidently left the restaurant right after me, but they had not rushed back to offer an apology for Savannah's cruel behavior. Their aggressive posture made it clear they were here to deliver a verdict. "Gwen, stop right there!" Thomas barked, slamming his car door shut. He marched across the paved drive, loosening his silk tie. "We need to talk about your living arrangements, and we are going to do it right now." I turned around slowly, folding my arms across my chest. I watched them approach, observing their absolute lack of self-awareness. "What about my living arrangements, Dad?" I asked, my voice completely stripped of human emotion. Brenda stepped forward, taking her place beside him. She looked at the beautiful guest house standing behind me, her critical eyes sweeping over the architecture before settling back on my face. Your behavior tonight was the final straw, Gwen. You embarrassed your sister, you embarrassed us, and you made Trey uncomfortable. We have tried to be patient with your bitter attitude, but we can no longer allow your toxic energy to ruin Savannah's bright future. My mother adjusted her designer coat, lifting her chin with that signature arrogance she wielded like a weapon. Savannah and Trey are going to move into the main house immediately after the wedding. They deeply need the space to start their life together, to build a proper family. Trey has a highly respectable position as a software sales director, and Savannah absolutely deserves a home that reflects their combined success. Therefore, your father and I have decided it is only fair that you pack up your things and move out of the guest house by the end of the month. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of her statement. You are kicking me out of the guest house so Savannah can have the entire estate, I stated softly. It is the practical choice. Brenda continued, her tone incredibly patronizing. You are 33 years old and completely single. You have no husband, no prospects, and no children on the horizon. You do not need a massive 2-story guest house. Savannah wants to convert this building into a bridal preparation suite for her bridal party. And eventually, she plans to use it as a private nursery when she and Trey have their children. You are just taking up valuable space here, Gwen. It is time for you to finally grow up, find an apartment downtown, and stop dragging this family down. The absolute delusion was breathtaking to behold. They stood on a driveway. They did not own aggressively pointing at a guest house. They did not pay for trying to kick me off a vast property that legally belonged entirely to me. They were literally trying to evict their own landlord. Thomas stepped closer, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a folded stack of thick papers and a heavy silver fountain pen. We want this transition to be perfectly clean and legal, he stated, his voice laced with the fake authority he loved to project to the world. Since you have been handling the property tax paperwork and utilities for us all these years, Savannah's lawyer drafted a formal relinquishment of residency. It states that you are voluntarily vacating the premises and surrendering any tenant claims to the guest house or the main property. We are not going to let you hold those utility bills over our heads and claim you have a legal right to stay. He shoved the legal documents and the silver pen forcefully against my chest, demanding I take them immediately. Sign the papers, Gwen. Sign them right now. You will have exactly 4 weeks to clear out every single piece of your cheap furniture and hand the keys over to your sister. If you make this difficult, I will personally have the police escort you off our property. Do you understand me? I looked down at the documents resting in my hands. I read the bold heading, demanding I surrender my rights to the estate. I read the threatening clauses, demanding I vacate the premises to make way for the golden child. I thought about the absolute devastation they were going to feel when they realized who actually owned the ground they were standing on. I looked up at Thomas and my mother Brenda. They stood tall, puffing their chests, waiting for me to break down, argue, or beg for my home. I did none of those things. I slowly uncapped the silver fountain pen. A chilling, empty smile spread slowly across my face as I looked directly into my father's incredibly demanding, arrogant eyes. I stared at the thick legal document resting in my hands. The paper felt heavy, carrying the weight of an absolute delusion that my parents had nurtured for the better part of a decade. Savannah's lawyer had apparently drafted this relinquishment of residency with complete confidence, citing Thomas and Brenda as the primary property owners. My father stood there tapping his expensive leather shoe against the pavement, waiting for me to press the silver fountain pen to the signature line. I truly believed he held all the power. He truly believed this piece of paper meant something. As my eyes scanned the aggressive legal jargon, my mind drifted back exactly 6 years. The reality of this estate was a secret my parents had buried so deeply, they actually managed to forget the truth. 6 years ago, Thomas and Brenda experienced a catastrophic financial collapse. My father had made a series of reckless, arrogant investments, leveraging every single asset they possessed to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. The banks eventually came collecting. The foreclosure was brutal, swift, and entirely public. I remember the day the eviction notices were taped to the front door of the main house. Savannah was away at college, living off student loans. My parents forced her to take, while lying about their wealth. My mother spent weeks crying in her bedroom, terrified that her country club friends would discover she was completely bankrupt. I was 27 at the time, quietly climbing the corporate ladder as a financial auditor. I had lived frugally, invested aggressively, and amassed a significant portfolio entirely out of their sight. When the bank put this massive suburban estate up for auction, my parents were utterly helpless. They begged me to save their reputation. They begged me to prevent the ultimate social humiliation. So, I stepped in. I liquidated a large portion of my investments, transferred the funds, and bought the estate in cash. I had paid the astronomical legal fees, settled their outstanding debts with local vendors, and shielded them from total ruin. I saved them from absolute ruin on all legally binding municipal, state, and federal documents. I am the 100% sole owner of this property. My name is on the deed. My name is on the property tax records. My name is on the comprehensive insurance policies. Thomas and Brenda are nothing more than non-paying tenants. They do not pay rent. They do not pay for maintenance. I have subsidized their luxurious suburban fantasy for 6 solid years, yet the human mind is a fascinating mechanism. Instead of experiencing gratitude, my parents immediately rewrote history. To protect their fragile egos, they convinced themselves that my financial intervention was merely a temporary family loan. They spun a wild narrative for Savannah and their social circle, claiming they simply restructured their assets for tax purposes and put the house in my name as a formality. Over time, that lie became their absolute truth. They genuinely forgot they were living on my charity. They attended their country club dinners, hosting lavish parties on the lawn, acting as if they were still the titans of the neighborhood. They pushed me into the backyard guest house, claiming I needed privacy for my accounting work, while they reclaimed the sprawling main house as their rightful kingdom. Now looking at this ridiculous, legally void document, the irony was almost suffocating. My non-paying tenants were attempting to serve an eviction notice to their actual landlord. They wanted to force me off my own property so they could gift my land to the golden child. I slowly rolled the silver fountain pen between my fingers. The cap snapped back into place with a sharp metallic click. I held the document out, offering it back to my father. "I am not going to sign this," I said, my voice completely serene. My father's face contorted with instant rage. The veins in his neck strained against his tight collar. "You will sign it, Gwen," he demanded, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You do not dictate the terms in this family anymore. You are a guest on this property, and your time is up." My mother crossed her arms, shaking her head with an exaggerated sigh of disappointment. "Do not make this a legal battle, Gwen. You know you cannot afford to fight your father in court. Just accept that your sister needs the space. Do not be so utterly selfish." I did not back away. I kept my chilling smile perfectly intact, absorbing their misplaced aggression. I handed the unsigned papers back to Thomas, forcing him to take them. "You misunderstand me," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I am not refusing to leave. You and Savannah want me out of the guest house. You want me to disappear from the property. I completely agree with you. It is time for a major transition. I will not sign your lawyer's paperwork because it is entirely unnecessary. I will pack my belongings. I will be completely out of this guest house and off this property well before the end of the month. You and Savannah can have exactly what you deserve." Thomas and Brenda visibly relaxed, the aggressive tension leaving their shoulders. They exchanged a victorious look. They thought my refusal to sign was just a last pathetic attempt to preserve my dignity before submitting to their ultimate authority. They thought they had won. "I am glad you are finally seeing reason," my father said, adjusting his suit jacket with a smug, triumphant smirk. "Have your boxes packed by next weekend. We want to start painting the guest house before the wedding." I gave them a slow, measured nod, turned around, and walked to the front door of my guest house. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside the quiet space, and firmly locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The moment the latch clicked into place, the smile dropped from my face, replaced by cold, calculated focus. I walked straight to my home office desk, dropped my purse on the floor, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room, reflecting the absolute determination in my eyes. I opened my encrypted email client. I did not search for moving companies. I did not look for storage units. I opened a new message window and typed in the private contact address for Vanguard Acquisitions. They were a notorious aggressive cash homebuyer syndicate operating heavily in the Chicago area. In the real estate auditing world, they were infamous. They did not care about home inspections. They did not care about interior conditions, and they certainly did not care about existing occupants. They bought premium lots for straight cash, bulldozed the existing structures, and built highly profitable luxury condominiums. Their most famous business tactic was their ruthless, immediate eviction process for anyone occupying the properties they purchased. They employed specialized corporate lawyers who executed 30-day notices to quit with absolute merciless efficiency. My fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting the email with swift, professional precision. I attached the verified deed, the property tax records, and the satellite layout of the entire estate. I requested an immediate off-market cash sale. I made my terms incredibly clear. I wanted a fast closing, zero contingencies, and I authorized them to handle the removal of all current residents with extreme prejudice. I hit send, watching the progress bar complete the delivery. The destruction of my family's fabricated reality was now officially in motion. I woke up the next morning feeling a profound sense of clarity. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere that had haunted my time in the guest house was completely gone. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop to review my corporate auditing schedules for the day. My mind was sharp, entirely focused on the intricate financial structures I dismantled and analyzed for a living. I was a professional at detecting fraud, identifying anomalies, and holding greedy executives accountable. I simply had never applied those professional skills to my own blood relatives until now. At precisely 9, my phone vibrated intensely against the granite countertop. It was an automated high-priority fraud alert from my primary banking institution. I picked up the device expecting a routine security check regarding an overseas software subscription or a flagged corporate travel expense. Instead, the notification highlighted a massive pending transaction on a specific account I rarely monitored. It was the Platinum Emergency Credit Card. My eyes narrowed as I tapped the notification to view the full transaction details. I had issued that specific card to my mother 3 years ago under incredibly strict conditions. Brenda had come to me crying about a sudden spike in her blood pressure and claimed she urgently needed to see an out-of-network cardiovascular specialist. She fed me a tearful, desperate story about how her and my father's asset restructuring left them temporarily lacking liquid cash for unexpected medical copays. I gave her the card with one absolute rule. It was for health emergencies, pharmacy runs, and necessary medical deductibles only. I set the limit generously high because I never wanted my parents to panic over a genuine health crisis. Apparently, my mother considered funding her golden child's vanity to be a life-or-death medical emergency. The pending charge blaring on my screen was for exactly $8,000. The merchant listed was not a hospital. It was not a specialized clinic. The merchant was Lido Bloom, an ultra-exclusive, appointment-only bridal boutique located in the most expensive shopping district of downtown Chicago. It was the kind of boutique that required a non-refundable deposit just to walk through the front doors and try on sample gowns. I set my coffee mug down. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the theft was almost impressive. Less than 12 hours ago, my family had tried to legally evict me from my own property. Less than 12 hours ago, Savannah had screamed that her ultimate wedding gift would be my permanent disappearance. And yet, here they were merrily swiping my emergency medical credit card to purchase a designer wedding dress. They truly believed I was nothing more than a mindless, bottomless vault designed to fund their delusions of grandeur. A lesser person might have immediately called the bank to report the fraud and cancel the transaction from the comfort of their kitchen. But calling the bank would only result in a declined card. My mother would likely act confused, pretend it was a bank error, and try to manipulate her way out of the embarrassment. I did not want to give them the luxury of a quiet decline. I wanted them to feel the exact same public humiliation they had inflicted on me at the restaurant the night before. I closed my laptop and sent a brief message to my corporate team, delegating my morning audits to my junior associates. I walked to my closet, pulled out a tailored designer blazer, and slipped on my sharpest heels. If I was going to crash a luxury bridal appointment, I was going to look like the wealthy financial auditor. I actually was not the pathetic spinster sister they constantly portrayed me to be. I grabbed my car keys and walked out to my sedan. The drive downtown took 30 minutes, but my mind worked with terrifying speed the entire way. I calculated the exact timeline of their morning. Savannah and Brenda must have booked this VIP appointment months in advance. They had probably been planning to manipulate my father into paying for the dress, but after the disastrous dinner last night, they likely realized his credit lines were completely tapped out. So Brenda reached into her designer purse and pulled out the emergency plastic I had trusted her with, assuming I would be too intimidated by their threats of eviction to ever confront them about the charge. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I pulled into a premium parking garage directly across from the boutique. The exterior of Lual Blanche was imposing, featuring floor-to-ceiling frosted glass, gold velvet curtains, and a discreet security guard standing by the elegant entrance. I walked up to the heavy glass doors, bypassed the guard with a confident nod, and pushed my way inside. The interior smelled of fresh leaves and expensive perfume. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Plush white sofas were arranged around massive gilded mirrors. The atmosphere was designed to make entitled brides feel like absolute royalty. I stood near the reception desk, my eyes scanning the private viewing pedestals. It did not take long to spot them. In the center of the largest viewing area, standing on a circular velvet pedestal, was Savannah. She was wearing a massive, heavily beaded designer gown featuring layers of imported silk and a sweeping cathedral train. She was twisting back and forth, admiring her reflection in the mirrors with absolute adoration. Sitting on a velvet sofa facing the pedestal was my mother. Brenda looked the picture of wealthy suburban bliss. She had a custom boutique shopping bag resting at her feet, likely filled with overpriced veils and accessories. A bridal consultant hovered nearby, fawning over Savannah and adjusting the intricate lace on the gown. The consultant stepped back and signaled to another employee, who immediately brought over a silver tray carrying 2 tall crystal flutes filled with sparkling liquid. The attendant handed one flute to Savannah and the other to Brenda. I walked slowly across the plush carpet, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood trim of the viewing area. I stopped just outside their line of sight, standing completely still in the shadows of a massive floral arrangement. I watched my mother raise her crystal flute toward the ceiling. Savannah beamed, raising her own glass in response. I stepped directly into the bright lights of the viewing area right as they clinked their glasses together, toasting to the perfect dress. "Toasting to the perfect dress," Savannah declared, holding her crystal flute high. "That is a beautiful sentiment for a dress you cannot afford," I said. My voice sliced through the serene classical music playing overhead. Savannah froze, her champagne flute stopped midway to her lips. Brenda spun around so fast, she nearly dropped her own glass. The color drained completely from my mother's face as she stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The bridal consultant stepped back, looking nervously between the three of us. I did not wait for my family to compose themselves. I walked straight past their viewing pedestal and headed directly toward the mahogany reception desk, where the boutique manager was currently processing the payment. She looked up with a polite professional smile that quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level and authoritative. "I am the primary account holder for the platinum card you just swiped for an $8,000 transaction." I need you to cancel that payment immediately. The card was stolen, and this is an unauthorized fraudulent charge. The manager's eyes widened in alarm. She immediately pulled her hands away from the payment terminal. Ma'am, are you sure the older lady over there presented the card just moments ago? I am absolutely certain, I replied, pulling out my driver's license to verify my identity. I issued that specific card solely for medical emergencies. The woman who handed it to you is attempting to commit credit card fraud to purchase a wedding gown. Cancel the transaction right now, or I will have my corporate legal team involve the authorities. The manager did not hesitate. She rapidly typed on her keyboard, hitting the necessary keystrokes to void the authorization. The machine printed a long red cancellation receipt. Over by the velvet pedestal, the reality of the situation finally registered. Savannah lowered her arms. The heavy silk and beaded lace of the gown, suddenly looking like a borrowed costume rather than a royal garment. The bridal, realizing her massive commission had just evaporated, stepped away from Savannah and crossed her arms. Several other brides and their families in adjacent viewing areas turned to watch the spectacle. Brenda finally found her voice. She slammed her crystal flute down on a side table and marched across the plush carpet toward the reception desk. Her face was contorted with absolute fury. Gwen, what on earth do you think you are doing? She demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the frosted glass walls. You are making a massive scene in front of these lovely people. Tell the manager to process the payment immediately. We had an agreement. We had no such agreement, Mom, I said, turning to face her fully. I gave you that emergency card 3 years ago when you claimed you needed a cardiovascular specialist. A designer wedding gown is not a medical emergency. You stole my financial information because you and Thomas are entirely broke, and you thought you could quietly manipulate me into funding Savannah's vanity. Savannah stepped off the pedestal. The heavy train of the gown dragged awkwardly behind her. She looked around the boutique, taking in the judgmental stares of the staff and the whispering from the other wealthy patrons. Her face burned red with absolute humiliation. She had spent the last 2 hours acting like a billionaire at A's, treating the bridal staff like her personal servants, only to be publicly exposed as a fraud who could not even afford her own dress. Gwen, you cannot do this to me, Savannah cried out, her voice cracking. I need this dress. The alterations are already planned. You are ruining my entire wedding experience. I am simply stopping a theft. Savannah, I replied coldly, if you want the dress, you can pay for it with your own money. Oh wait, you cannot because you do not have any. Brenda lunged forward, her hands balled into tight fists. You are a cold-blooded monster, she screamed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her refined suburban facade. How can you be so vicious to your own sister? We let you live on our property. We tolerate your miserable presence, and this is how you repay us, by humiliating us in public. You are sick, Gwen. You are deeply, deeply sick. I did not flinch at her screaming. I simply stared at her, absorbing her toxic rage without a single ounce of reaction. I looked past her shoulder to the velvet sofa where she had been sitting. Her expensive designer purse sat open, and resting right on top of her wallet was my platinum credit card. I walked past my screaming mother, approached the sofa, and calmly reached into her bag. Hey, Brenda shouted, rushing back toward me. Get your hands out of my purse. That is private property. I pulled the physical card out, holding it up for her to see before slipping it safely into my own blazer pocket. It is my property, I corrected her, and your access to my funds is permanently revoked. Savannah burst into loud, hysterical tears, sinking down onto the velvet sofa, in her unpaid gown. The boutique manager signaled for the security guard, clearly ready to ask my mother and sister to leave the premises. I had accomplished exactly what I came to do. I turned my back on the pathetic scene and walked out the front doors of the boutique, leaving the two of them to face the consequences of their own actions. The bright morning sun hit my face as I stepped out onto the busy sidewalk. I felt a tremendous surge of adrenaline. The first chain of the domino effect had officially fallen. I crossed the street and walked into the parking garage, my mind already calculating the next phase of the liquidation process. As I rounded the corner toward my parked sedan, I suddenly collided with a tall, solid figure. I stumbled backward, catching my balance just in time. "Whoa, I am so sorry," a deep voice said. I looked up and found myself standing face to face with Trey. He was dressed in a sharp professional suit, holding an enormous, expensive bouquet of white roses and lilies. He looked incredibly handsome and successful, exactly the kind of man Savannah wanted to show off to her friends. But right now, Trey did not look happy. He looked utterly bewildered. "Gwen," Trey asked, recognizing me. "What are you doing here? I thought you were working." I adjusted my blazer quickly, regaining my composure. "I had a quick errand to run," I said smoothly. "I assume those flowers are to celebrate Savannah finding her dress." Trey looked down at the massive bouquet in his hands, then pulled his phone out of his pocket, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Yeah, they were supposed to be. I wanted to surprise her, but my phone has been blowing up for the last 2 minutes. Savannah just sent me a dozen frantic text messages." He looked away from his screen and met my eyes, his expression shifting from confusion to serious concern. "Gwen, what is going on?" "Savannah is crying hysterically. She just texted me that you showed up at the boutique, ambushed them, and now you are actively trying to bankrupt her and your parents. Why would she say you are trying to bankrupt them?" I stood there in the dimly lit parking garage, looking at the man who was about to marry into my deeply toxic, financially fraudulent family. The second domino was ready to fall. I looked at the massive bouquet of white roses and lilies in Trey's hands. He was a genuinely good man. I was incredibly hardworking, entirely self-made, and deeply loyal. He did not deserve to become collateral damage in my family's relentless cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. "There is a quiet coffee shop right across the street," I said, gesturing toward the exit of the concrete parking garage. "Buy me a black coffee tray. We need to have a very honest conversation, and I guarantee it will be the most important one you have before your wedding day." Trey hesitated for a fraction of a second. His phone vibrated again in his hand, displaying yet another frantic message from Savannah. But his logical instincts clearly overrode her emotional panic. He gave a sharp nod, lowered his phone, and followed me out into the bright Chicago morning. We walked in silence to a high-end espresso bar on the corner. The interior was sleek and minimalist, filled with the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. We found a secluded booth near the back windows. Trey gently placed the extravagant bouquet on the empty chair beside him. He ordered my black coffee and a cappuccino for himself, paying with his phone before sitting across from me. He folded his hands on the table, his posture tight and defensive. "I am a straightforward guy." Gwent began, his voice low and serious. "I direct software sales for enterprise clients. I deal in hard data, clear contracts, and verified facts. Right now, the facts I have been given do not align with the woman sitting in front of me. I need to understand why my fiancé is currently sobbing in a bridal boutique, claiming her sister just tried to bankrupt her." I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. "Tell me exactly what Savannah has told you about my financial situation. I want to hear her exact narrative." Trey let out a heavy sigh, running a hand over his closely cropped hair. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but his desire for the truth pushed him forward. "Savannah told me that you are drowning in a mountain of bad debt. She said you made some terrible investments in your 20s and never recovered. According to her, Thomas and Brenda let you live in their backyard guest house, completely rent-free, because they feel sorry for you. She told me you are deeply insecure and wildly jealous that she is getting married first. She said your actions today were just a desperate, spiteful attempt to ruin her happiness because you cannot fix your own life." I listened to every single word. I did not interrupt him. I did not raise my voice in defensive anger. I did not launch into a passionate speech about the decades of emotional abuse, the blatant favoritism, or the way my parents had systematically treated me like an invisible bank vault. I remained perfectly composed. As a senior financial auditor, I knew that emotional outbursts only weakened your position during a negotiation. I spoke his language instead. I spoke and verified documentation. Savannah chose her partner very well, I thought to myself. Trey was protective, financially stable, and deeply honorable. He was the absolute perfect host for a family of relentless parasites. Trey, I said calmly, setting my coffee mug down on the wooden table. I am not going to argue with Xana's emotional narrative. I am not going to sit here and try to convince you that I am a good sister or a victim of their cruelty. I am a financial auditor. I deal exclusively in documented reality. So I am going to let the documentation speak entirely for itself. I reached into my structured designer tote bag. I bypassed the platinum emergency credit card I had just confiscated from my mother. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a single, heavily folded piece of premium stock paper. It was a document I always carried with me as part of my financial records. I placed it face down on the table between us. Savannah told you that Thomas and Brenda are paying for this entire wedding. Correct? I asked. Trey nodded, his eyes fixed on the folded paper. Yes. Thomas sat me down in his study a month ago. He shook my hand and told me that money was no object. He said Savannah was his golden girl, and he was taking care of the venue, the catering, and the dress. He explicitly told me not to worry about a single expense. I gave a short, humorless laugh. My father is an exceptional storyteller. Go ahead and open the paper tray. Read it carefully. Trey reached across the table and picked up the document. He unfolded it. It was the official legally binding contract and receipt for their luxury wedding venue in downtown Chicago. His eyes scanned the heavy black text, reading the dates, the incredibly strict cancellation clauses, and the itemized list of premium services Savannah had demanded for her reception. Then his eyes drifted down to the bottom of the page, settling on the payment confirmation and the signature line. I watched the exact moment his reality began to fracture. I watched his brow furrow as his brain tried to process the impossible information sitting right in front of his face. The total deposit paid last month was $15,000. But the name printed on the receipt was not Thomas. It was not Brenda. The signature on the primary guarantor line belonged solely to me. This is your name, Trey whispered, looking up at me with profound shock in his eyes. You paid the $15,000 deposit. You are the sole guarantor for the entire venue. I paid the venue deposit. I confirmed, my voice steady and completely unapologetic. I also paid the $3,000 floral retainer 2 weeks ago. That credit card your fiancé just tried to use at the bridal boutique. That is my personal emergency medical card. My parents do not have a cent to their names. They are completely bankrupt. Trey, I have been funding the illusion of their massive wealth for 6 years. I own the guest house. I own the main house. They are nothing but my non-paying tenants, and they have been lying to you since the moment you shook my father's hand. Trey dropped the contract onto the table as if it had physically burned him. The blood drained from his face. He looked out the window of the coffee shop, staring blankly at the busy Chicago street, watching his entire future with Savannah collapse into a terrifying pile of financial lies and deceit. He was a smart man. He immediately understood that if they could lie to him with such ease about something this massive, there was absolutely no telling what else they were hiding. I stood up from the booth, smoothing out my tailored blazer. I did not ask for the venue receipt back. He needed to keep it. He needed to hold the physical proof of their betrayal. I am leaving the property and severing all ties with my family, I said, looking down at him. I am giving you the truth because you are an honest man who walked blindly into a trap. Do whatever you want with this information, but I will give you one final piece of professional advice before I disappear. Trey looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely silent, waiting for my next words. Run a deep, comprehensive credit check on your fiancé before you even think about signing a legally binding marriage license. I warned him, my tone utterly serious. Look at her debts. Look at her actual assets. Do not become their next victim. Trey, I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him sitting alone at the table with my $15,000 receipt and his useless bouquet of white flowers. The warning had been delivered. The truth was out. The third domino had just been pushed. The morning air felt crisp as I walked to my car, leaving the coffee shop behind. I had dropped the ultimate financial bombshell squarely into Trey's lap. He was a software sales director, a man whose career revolved around analyzing data, mitigating risk, and closing secure contracts. I knew exactly how his mind worked. He would not just take my word for it. He would investigate. He would pull public records. He would demand to see Savannah's credit report, and when he did, he would discover a terrifying mountain of hidden consumer debt, maxed out retail cards, and a credit score so abysmally low it would disqualify her from a basic car loan. Savannah had spent years crafting the illusion of a wealthy heiress, but Trey was about to see the fraudulent math behind the magic trick. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, started the engine, and merged into the bustling Chicago traffic. The drive back to the suburban estate was peaceful. My mind was already categorizing the next phases of my extraction. I needed to separate my personal property from the items I planned to leave behind. I needed to finalize the off-market property transfer. The Vanguard Acquisition Syndicate had already responded to my encrypted email, confirming their intense interest in the lot. They were aggressive, fast, and entirely ruthless. It was exactly the kind of corporate energy I needed to completely eradicate my family's suburban kingdom. I arrived at the estate and parked by the guest house. The main house was dead silent. Brenda and Savannah had likely retreated to lick their wounds and formulate a new narrative to explain away the disaster at the bridal boutique. I spent the remainder of the afternoon meticulously organizing my home office. I packed my sensitive financial documents, my passport, and my hard drives into a secure, fireproof briefcase. I did not touch a single piece of furniture. I had purchased every item in this guest house, but I no longer cared about material possessions. I cared about complete, unadulterated freedom. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting dark shadows across the manicured lawn. I poured myself a glass of red wine, sat at my kitchen island, and reviewed the final liquidation contract on my laptop. Everything was proceeding with perfect precision. At exactly 8:00 that night, my phone screen illuminated the dark kitchen. A text message notification popped up. It was a group message from Brenda, including Thomas and Savannah in the thread. I unlocked the screen, took a slow sip of my wine, and read the message. The sheer arrogance radiating from the text was almost comical. Gwen, the message began dripping with passive-aggressive venom. Your father and I are utterly appalled by your vicious, toxic behavior today. You purposefully tried to ruin your sister's beautiful wedding experience out of pure malicious jealousy. Savannah is completely devastated. Her anxiety is through the roof because of your cruel ambush at the boutique. We absolutely refuse to let your bitter energy destroy this joyous season of her life. Therefore, your father and I are taking Savannah to a luxury resort in the Bahamas for the next 10 days. She deeply needs to decompress and heal from the emotional trauma you inflicted on her today. I scoffed, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of their reality. They were bankrupt. They had no cash. I knew exactly how they were funding this sudden, extravagant tropical escape. Thomas had one final high-interest credit line, hidden away a card he had desperately kept open by making minimum payments. He was maxing out his absolute last financial lifeline to buy first-class tickets and an all-inclusive resort package just to protect his golden child's fragile ego. They were literally financing their own destruction. I continued reading the second half of Brenda's message, where her tone shifted from protective mother to aggressive dictator. Our flight leaves tomorrow morning, the text commanded. We will be out of the country for 10 full days. We expect your cheap furniture, your miserable attitude, and every single trace of your existence to be completely gone from our property by the time we return. You are officially evicted. Do not attempt to contact us while we are trying to heal. Leave your keys on the kitchen counter. Goodbye, Gwen. I stared at the glowing screen, a genuine delighted smile spreading across my face. I could not have engineered a more perfect scenario if I had tried. My family was voluntarily leaving the country. They were abandoning the estate for 10 solid days, leaving me with completely unrestricted, unmonitored access to the property. They were handing me the ultimate opportunity to execute the sale, strip the house, and orchestrate their absolute downfall without a single interruption. They thought they were punishing me with isolation. They had no idea they were simply giving the demolition crew a clear path. I set my wine glass down and typed my response. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not point out that they were legally incapable of evicting the actual owner of the property. I typed 4 simple words: "Have a great trip." I hit send, silencing the thread immediately. The final trap was officially set. The next morning arrived with a bright, clear sky. I sat at my home office desk, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, watching a live aviation tracking application on my laptop screen. I watched the specific flight number my parents had booked taxi onto the runway at O'Hare International Airport. I watched the icon slowly accelerate and lift off the ground, heading south toward the Caribbean. Their plane was officially in the air. They were completely disconnected from the world, trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. Exactly 5 minutes after their flight status changed to departed, the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel broke the silence of the suburban street. I stood up, walked to my front window, and pulled back the blinds. A massive jet-black luxury sport utility vehicle, with deeply tinted windows, pulled smoothly into the sprawling driveway. The heavy doors opened in perfect synchronization. 3 men in sharp, charcoal gray suits stepped out onto the pavement. They carried thick leather briefcases and exuded the cold, calculating energy of corporate predators. The real estate investors from Vanguard Acquisitions had arrived, and they were ready to buy the empire. I walked out of my guest house and approached the black sport utility vehicle. Just as the 3 men reached the edge of the manicured lawn, the lead investor stepped forward, offering a firm, professional handshake. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. He hardly began scanning the exterior of the property, calculating value before we even exchanged a single pleasantry. I handed him a printed packet containing the verified deed, the latest property tax clearances, and the structural blueprints of the entire estate. I did not waste time with small talk. I simply turned and led them directly toward the grand entrance of the main house. I bypassed the decorative brass knocker and used my master key to unlock the heavy double doors. The house was completely silent, carrying the faint lingering scent of my mother's expensive floral perfume and the lemon polish the cleaning service used just yesterday. We stepped into the sprawling foyer. Mr. Harrison and his associates immediately noted the imported marble flooring and the custom sweeping staircase. I guided them into the primary living room. It was a massive sunken space featuring vated ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a breathtaking stone fireplace. Mr. Harrison praised the pristine condition of the crown molding and the flawless hardwood floors. I maintained a polite professional smile, highlighting the recent upgrades to the central heating and cooling systems. But my mind was playing a completely different reel of footage. Looking at the center of that immaculate living room, I did not see luxury. I saw the exact spot where Savannah stood on her 18th birthday, holding the keys to a brand new luxury convertible that my parents could not afford. I saw myself sitting quietly on the edge of the sofa, holding my college textbooks, listening to my father loudly declare that Savannah was the absolute pride of the family. I remembered my mother telling guests that I was just the reliable, boring older sister who would likely never amount to anything spectacular. Every square inch of this magnificent room was saturated with the toxic echo of their blatant favoritism. I pushed the memory down, gestured toward the custom built-in shelving, and smoothly redirected the investor's attention to the sheer square footage of the open floor plan. Clary Harrison. That's the name my husband screamed into the phone 18 minutes after he told me to get it out. By then, every joint account we shared had already been frozen. By then, my signature had already triggered the withdrawal of my $885 million ownership stake from the company. Everyone believed belonged to him. By then, the empire he thought he controlled had started collapsing one legal document at a time. My phone kept vibrating on the passenger seat. One missed call, then 12, then 34, then 67. I didn't answer a single one because less than half an hour earlier, while everyone around us sang happy birthday to our little boy, I'd watched my husband kiss my best friend, and when I confronted him, he looked me straight in the eyes and said 5 words, "I'll never forget, accept it or get out." So, I did. I got out, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I carried the only thing that truly mattered, my son. People often assume that betrayal arrives with warning signs loud enough for anyone to hear. Looking back now, I know that's rarely true. It comes quietly wrapped inside routines, excuses, and little changes you explain away, because love makes you generous with second chances. My name is Claire Harrison. I'm 38 years old, a widow's daughter, the mother of one beautiful little boy named Ethan, and for most of my adult life, the woman standing just outside the spotlight while everyone applauded someone else. Our home sat on nearly 4 acres in Fairfield County, Connecticut. It wasn't flashy by billionaire standards, though magazines occasionally featured it because the gardens overlooked a small private lake. My father had bought the property decades earlier when Harrison Capital was still a modest investment firm with fewer than 20 employees. Dad believed success should be lived quietly. He drove his own car. He knew every employee's spouse by name. Every Christmas, he personally handed bonuses to the custodial staff before anyone else. When he passed away 6 years earlier after a brief illness, I inherited his shares according to a trust that had been carefully planned long before anyone imagined he would be gone so soon. Those shares represented 62% of Harrison Capital. Most people never knew that was exactly how Dad wanted it. Daniel and I met 15 years ago at a charity fundraiser in New York. He was handsome without trying too hard, confident, without seeming arrogant. At least that's how he appeared then. He made me laugh. He remembered small details. When we married, people called us the perfect couple. For a long time, they were probably right. Then success grew faster than character. Harrison Capital expanded into private equity, commercial real estate, and technology investments. Newspapers loved interviewing Daniel because he spoke well on camera. I preferred conference rooms over television studios, spreadsheets over microphones. Eventually, the public began referring to Harrison Capital as Daniel Harrison's company. Neither of us corrected them. It didn't seem important until it became everything. Our son Ethan arrived after years of believing we might never have children. Holding him for the first time felt like every disappointment I'd ever carried suddenly made sense. He was the greatest gift of my life. His first birthday deserved to be special. Melissa insisted on helping organize everything. Melissa Carter had been my best friend since college. We survived finals together, stood beside each other at our weddings, visited each other through illnesses, promotions, heartbreaks, and celebrations. She knew every chapter of my life, or so I believed. The party filled our backyard with nearly 80 guests, neighbors, family, business associates, children chasing balloons, grandparents sitting beneath white tents. The smell of barbecue drifted through the summer air, while a local jazz trio played soft standards. Everyone over 60 seemed to recognize immediately. My mother-in-law spent nearly an hour showing Ethan to anyone willing to admire him. "He has Daniel's smile," she proudly announced. I smiled politely. Actually, he had my father's eyes. The same gentle gray, the same thoughtful expression. Small details matter to mothers. Daniel floated naturally from group to group, shaking hands, laughing loudly, accepting compliments, as though he were hosting a corporate reception instead of his son's birthday. I watched him from across the yard. He barely looked at me. Months earlier, that might have hurt. Now, it simply felt familiar. Marriage changes. People become busy. Children demand attention. Those were the explanations I repeated to myself whenever something felt slightly off. Melissa appeared carrying another tray of lemonade. "You've hardly eaten," she said warmly. "I've been chasing a 1-year-old. She laughed. "You always wanted this." I did. She squeezed my shoulder. "I'm happy for you." Funny how some lies sound exactly like kindness. As afternoon turned toward evening, guests gathered around the birthday cake. Blue frosting, tiny edible stars, one oversized candle shaped like the number 1. Someone dimmed the patio lights. Everyone crowded close. Phones came out. Grandparents leaned forward. The familiar chorus began. "Happy birthday to you." Ethan clapped because everyone else was clapping. He had no idea the song was for him. He simply laughed. I'll remember that laugh until the day I die. Halfway through the song, I noticed Daniel wasn't beside us anymore. At first, I assumed he'd stepped inside to answer a business call. That happened often. Then I realized Melissa had disappeared, too. Something inside me tightened. Not panic, not suspicion, just awareness. a tiny thread pulling at the edge of my thoughts. I quietly slipped away before anyone noticed. The hallway inside the house was cool and silent after the cheerful noise outside. The kitchen was empty. So was the living room. I walked past the staircase toward my father's old study. The door wasn't completely closed, just slightly open, enough to hear a whisper, then a laugh. Melissa's laugh. I stopped. Every instinct told me to turn around. Instead, I looked through the narrow opening. Daniel had both hands around her waist. She touched his face like she'd done it. Then they kissed. Not briefly, not awkwardly, comfortably. Like two people who had stopped worrying about getting caught. Time slowed in the strangest way. I noticed ridiculous things. The antique clock Dad had restored himself, the framed fishing photo on the bookshelf, Melissa's lipstick on Daniel's collar. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply closed the door as quietly as I'd opened it. Outside, applause erupted. Ethan had blown out his candle with everyone's help. I walked back into the backyard wearing the same smile I'd worn all afternoon. Nobody noticed anything. I held my son, posed for photographs, opened presents, thanked guests for coming. An elderly neighbor hugged me. "You've built such a beautiful family, Claire." I hugged her back. "Thank you. Sometimes grace means surviving the next 5 minutes." The last guests finally left shortly after 9. Paper plates littered the tables. Half-dead deflated balloons drifted across the lawn. The catering staff packed their equipment. Melissa had already gone home, or so, Daniel claimed. He poured himself a drink as if nothing unusual had happened. I stood in the kitchen watching him. "We need to talk," he sighed before I finished speaking. "Can this wait?" "No," he looked annoyed, more than concerned. "What now?" "I saw you." His expression didn't change, not even a flicker. In Dad's study. Still nothing. "You and Melissa." He set his glass down. Without saying a word, he grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave bruises, but firmly enough that I had no choice except to follow him upstairs. He pulled me into our bedroom, closed the door, locked it, then turned toward me with a face so cold I barely recognized the man I'd married. "Claire," he said evenly, "accept it or get out." I stared at him, waiting for the apology that never came. Instead, he continued, "Melissa understands me. She doesn't question every decision I make. This has been going on for a while, and honestly, I'm tired of pretending. You brought her into our son's birthday." He shrugged. "It wasn't planned. You kissed her in my father's study." Another shrug. I deserved to be happy. I searched his face for guilt. There wasn't any, only certainty. Then he delivered the sentence that convinced me my marriage had already ended long before tonight. "You won't leave anyway. You need this life too much." He believed the house was his, the company was his, the money was his, and I was simply the woman who benefited from it. I looked at him for another long moment. Then I walked past him without saying another word. He didn't stop me. Upstairs, Ethan was asleep in his crib, still wearing the little blue sweater my mother had knitted for him. I lifted him carefully into my arms. He stirred, rested his tiny head against my shoulder, and fell back asleep. I carried one small overnight bag. Nothing else. No jewelry, no photographs, no arguments. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the house where I'd believed my family would grow old together. In less than 30 minutes, Daniel Harrison would discover just how little he understood about the woman he had ordered to leave. I didn't look back as the gates closed behind me. The road leading away from our home wound through quiet neighborhoods where porch lights glowed softly against the warm Connecticut night. Ethan slept peacefully in his car seat, completely unaware that his entire world had changed before he had even finished celebrating his first birthday. No, I envied him. Children don't measure life by betrayal. They measure it by whether someone is there when they wake up. I whispered into the rearview mirror. "I'm here, sweetheart." He never opened his eyes. I drove without a destination for nearly 20 minutes before pulling into the parking lot of a small waterfront hotel in Stamford. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, discreet, and close enough to Manhattan for the business calls I already knew I needed to make. The young woman at the front desk smiled kindly. Checking in just for a few nights, she noticed Ethan sleeping in my arms. He looks exhausted. It was a big birthday. She handed me a room key. "I hope tomorrow is easier." "So do I." Neither of us knew how impossible that wish was. Once inside the room, I laid Ethan carefully in the portable crib the hotel staff brought upstairs. I watched him breathe for several long minutes. Then I walked onto the small balcony overlooking the harbor. The cool night air steadied me. I finally allowed myself one deep breath. Not a sob, not anger, just acceptance. My father used to tell me something whenever difficult decisions landed on his desk. Claire, emotions belong in your heart. Decisions belong in your head. I had spent years believing those words were about business. That night, I realized they were about survival. I reached into my handbag and removed the leather folder I almost always carried. Most women carried cosmetics. I carried legal documents. Years earlier, after my father died, our attorneys insisted I never travel without copies of the trust agreements and emergency corporate authorizations. They hoped I'd never need them. Neither did I. I dialed the first number. Richard, my attorney, answered on the second ring. Claire, his voice immediately changed. What's happened? I've left Daniel. Silence, then a slow exhale. I was afraid this day might come. You knew. I knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what. I need the emergency provisions. He didn't ask questions. When? Now. I'll notify the legal team, everything. Understood. He paused. Are you safe? Yes. And Ethan sleeping good. I'll handle the rest. I ended the call. Next came Margaret Ellis, my private banker in New York. She had worked with my father for almost 30 years. When she heard my voice, she immediately sensed something unusual. You never call this late. I need immediate action. I'm listening. I want every joint personal account frozen tonight. No exceptions. No exceptions. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. This will create quite a reaction. I know. Do you have legal authority? I signed it 6 years ago, I remember. So do it. It'll be done within minutes. Her calm professionalism reminded me why Dad trusted her completely. The third call mattered most. It wasn't to the CEO. It wasn't to the board. It was to Harrison Capital's corporate secretary. Few people outside executive leadership understood the role. She maintained every official corporate record, every shareholder authorization, every emergency governance document. Her name was Linda. She answered sleepily. Claire, I'm sorry to wake you. You never need to apologize. I need Resolution 12 activated. Complete silence. When she finally spoke, her voice had become formal. Are you certain? Yes, that provision has never been used. I know, it will immediately trigger board notification. I understand. It may affect the market, I understand. It could remove nearly $900 million in equity. I understand. Another pause, then one simple sentence. I'll begin immediately. The call ended. I leaned against the balcony railing. There it was. The point of no return. People often imagine enormous financial decisions happen with dramatic speeches and crowded conference rooms. Most don't. Sometimes they happen because one exhausted woman says one quiet word. Yes. My father had insisted on unusual protections after several friends lost family businesses through bitter divorces and hostile takeovers. He structured Harrison Capital so that inherited controlling shares could never be manipulated by marriage alone. Ownership remained mine always. Even Daniel had signed acknowledgments years earlier. I often wondered whether he had actually read them. Apparently not. The fourth call surprised even me. I phoned our chief financial officer, David Moreno. He answered cautiously. Claire, you'll be hearing from Linda. I already received 2 alerts. They're real. What happened? Daniel. He didn't ask for details. What do you need from me? I need payroll protected. He sounded confused. Payroll? Whatever happens over the next few weeks, our employees don't deserve uncertainty. We have over 200 people. I know every one of them depends on those paychecks. You've already thought this through. No. I looked through the glass door at Ethan. I just know who shouldn't suffer. David became quiet. Finally, he said something that stayed with me. Your father would be proud of that answer. I thanked him before hanging up. At 10:42 p.m., my phone vibrated. Margaret, joint accounts are frozen. Thank you. Daniel attempted 3 transactions while we were processing. I closed my eyes. He already knows. Apparently, another vibration. Richard, the emergency filings are complete. Then, Linda, Resolution 12 has been entered into the corporate record. Everything had happened exactly as my father designed it. Legal, transparent, irreversible. At 10:49 p.m., I opened the shareholder portal on my phone. One final authorization remained. It represented my entire ownership position, $885 million in equity, years of accumulated value, generations of work. I wasn't destroying the company. I was removing my ownership under provisions every director had previously approved. My thumb hovered above the confirmation button. I didn't think about Daniel. I thought about my father, about Ethan, about every lesson I'd ignored because I believed love could overcome arrogance. Then I pressed confirm. The screen displayed one word, completed. I set the phone on the table. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then it began. Buzz. 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 Daniel. Ignored. Buzz. Melissa. Ignored. Buzz. Chief Operating Officer. Ignored. Buzz. Board Chairman. Ignored. The vibrations came so quickly the phone almost crawled across the tabletop. I picked it up only once. Not to answer, to look. 67 missed calls. The number almost seemed unreal. Voicemails poured in one after another. The first was Daniel. Claire answered the phone. This isn't funny. The second, what the hell did you do? The third, the bank says. Our accounts are frozen. The fourth wasn't angry anymore. Please call me. By the 10th message, panic had replaced confidence. By the 15th, he was shouting at someone else. By the 20th, he sounded frightened. I switched the phone to silent. For years, everyone believed Daniel Harrison held the reins of Harrison Capital. Television interviews had reinforced that image. Magazine covers had celebrated his leadership. Industry conferences invited him to deliver keynote speeches. Meanwhile, I quietly chaired governance meetings, approved long-term strategy, reviewed risk assessments, and signed documents that rarely made headlines. I never corrected the public. Recognition had never interested me. Peace had. But peace requires mutual respect. Without it, silence becomes surrender. Around midnight, another call came, this time from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Claire, it was Daniel. He must have borrowed someone else's phone. You've made your point. My point? You froze everything. Yes, you've got to reverse this. I remained silent. Claire, listen to me. No, Daniel. You don't understand what's happening. I understand perfectly. The board's calling an emergency meeting. I expected that. The banks are asking questions. I expected that too. His breathing became uneven. You can't do this. I already did. You'll destroy everything we built. I finally spoke the words that had quietly waited inside me all evening. No, Daniel. A long pause settled between us. Then I said, I'm protecting what my father built. He didn't answer. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I ended the call. Back inside the room, Ethan stirred in his sleep. I walked over and rested my hand gently on his back. His tiny fingers wrapped around one of mine without waking. In that simple moment, every doubt disappeared. I hadn't left because I wanted revenge. I'd left because my son deserved to grow up. Watching a mother who knew the difference between forgiveness and permission. Outside the harbor, lights shimmered across the dark water. Inside, my phone finally became still. For the first time since walking out of that house, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of a different life, one built not on appearances, but on truth. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I didn't recognize the room. Then, Ethan made a soft little sound from his crib, stretched his arms toward me, and smiled the same carefree smile he'd worn while everyone sang to him the day before. Children have a remarkable gift. They wake each morning believing the world is still good. I prayed he would keep that gift for a long time. I picked him up, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, Happy birthday, Day 2. He giggled. It was the first time I'd smiled since leaving home. Downstairs, the hotel dining room was nearly empty, except for a retired couple sharing coffee and the morning newspaper. The gentleman looked over as Ethan enthusiastically banged a plastic spoon against the high chair. That's a healthy little fellow, he said with a grin. He certainly keeps me moving. His wife smiled warmly. Our grandchildren do the same thing. There was comfort in ordinary conversations. They reminded me the world hadn't ended. Only one chapter had. When we returned to the room, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen lit up so quickly it almost startled me. More than 200 notifications, voicemails, emails, texts, board alerts, financial updates, media inquiries. I ignored almost all of them. One message caught my attention. It was from David Moreno. Call me when you can. It's serious, I dialed immediately. You've probably seen the market alerts, he said. I haven't looked. Our lenders suspended negotiations on the Chicago acquisition. I expected something. Not this, he sighed. 3 institutional investors are demanding an emergency briefing. How are the employees? They're scared. That word settled heavily in my chest. Scared? Not angry? Not disloyal, just frightened. David continued. The rumor mill is moving faster than facts. What are people saying? Everything. That the company is bankrupt. It isn't. That you're divorcing Daniel. That's true. That federal investigators are involved. They aren't. That the company will shut down by Friday. It won't. He paused. What do you want me to tell people? I looked out the window toward the harbor. The truth, which is payroll is protected. I've already secured that. No layoffs. I can promise that no one loses their job because 2 executives failed their marriage. David became quiet. Finally, he said, I'll make sure everyone hears exactly that. After hanging up, I packed our bags. The hotel had served its purpose. I needed somewhere quieter, somewhere that still felt like home. 3 hours later, Ethan and I pulled into the driveway of my parents' old lake house in western Connecticut. The house wasn't large. It wasn't glamorous. It had creaky wooden floors, faded blue shutters, and a porch swing my father built himself when I was 12. Every summer of my childhood lived inside those walls. Dad taught me to fish from the small dock. Mom planted roses that somehow continued blooming years after she was gone. The place smelled like cedar, old books, and memories. I unlocked the front door. Welcome home, I whispered for the first time in years. The words felt honest. Life slowed almost immediately. Instead of rushing into conference calls before breakfast, I made oatmeal while Ethan watched birds through the kitchen window. Instead of reviewing quarterly earnings, I pushed a stroller along the lake shore. Instead of attending executive dinners, I sat on the porch listening to frogs sing as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The silence wasn't lonely. It was healing. By the 3rd day, the media had discovered I was gone. Television trucks appeared outside our former home. Financial commentators debated whether Harrison Capital would survive. Some called my actions ruthless. Others called them brilliant. Neither description felt accurate. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to stop pretending. Late that afternoon, someone knocked on the front door. I already knew who it was before looking through the window. Melissa. She stood on the porch wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. For a long moment, I considered not answering. Instead, I opened the door halfway. What are you doing here? I just want to talk. There isn't much left to say. Please. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me so Ethan couldn't hear. Melissa removed her sunglasses. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her confidence had vanished. I never wanted this. I almost laughed. You never wanted what to hurt you. You managed anyway. Tears formed instantly. It just happened. I looked at her quietly. No, it did. No, Melissa. She shook her head desperately. We didn't plan it, I know. Her expression changed. You do. Affairs aren't usually planned. She stared at me. They're chosen. She looked down. It was a mistake. I reached into my handbag and removed a thin folder. I thought you might say that. She frowned. What is that? I handed her several printed pages. The hotel receipts, private flight manifests, restaurant reservations, corporate credit card statements, phone records. Each page documented meetings stretching back nearly 2 years. She turned the pages slowly. Her face lost all color. How? I oversee corporate compliance. She blinked. I didn't investigate because I was suspicious. I met her eyes. I investigated because company expenses suddenly stopped making sense. Neither of us spoke. The breeze rustled the maple trees above us. Finally, she whispered, Daniel said you never paid attention. I paid attention to everything. So why didn't you say anything? Because I kept hoping there was another explanation. She covered her mouth. I am so sorry. I believed she felt ashamed. I didn't believe she was sorry until she'd been caught. Those are different things. She handed the papers back with trembling hands. What happens now? You go home. And us? There hasn't been an us since you walked into my father's study. She started crying openly. I felt sadness, but not pity. She turned, walked to her car, and drove away without looking back. I never saw her again. That evening, David called once more. The board met today. How did it go? Poorly, Daniel. He spent most of the meeting insisting this was temporary. It isn't. They know that now. David hesitated. There was another problem. What? The banks requested updated governance documents. I already knew what that meant. They've realized who the controlling shareholder actually was. Yes. And there were some surprised faces. I couldn't help smiling faintly. For years, they congratulated the wrong person. You never seemed to mind. I honestly didn't. So, what changed? I looked through the screen door. Ethan was sitting on the living room rug, carefully stacking wooden blocks my father had carved decades earlier. One block fell over. He laughed and started again. I stopped confusing humility with invisibility. David didn't respond immediately. Then he quietly said, "That's a lesson a lot of us learn too late." That night, after Ethan asleep, I sat alone on the dock. The lake reflected thousands of stars. My father loved this view. Whenever business became overwhelming, he'd bring me here. He once told me, companies recover from bad quarters. Families don't always recover from broken trust. At the time, I thought he was talking about balance sheets. Now I understood he was talking about life. The phone rang again. Daniel, I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. His voice sounded different. Not confident, not commanding, just tired. Claire. Yes, I've been looking everywhere for you. I know. I wasn't calling about the money. I waited. The board doesn't trust me anymore. I remained silent. They asking questions they should. I never imagined. His voice cracked. That everything could unravel this fast. I closed my eyes. Neither had I. Not because of the company. Because of us. When I finally spoke, my voice stayed calm. Daniel, the company isn't falling apart because I left. He didn't answer. It's falling apart because trust did. The line remained silent for several seconds. Then he quietly whispered, I think I'm finally beginning to understand. I wasn't sure he truly did, but for the first time, he had stopped blaming everyone except himself. Sometimes that's where real change begins. The morning after my conversation with Daniel, the lake was perfectly still. Not a ripple, not a breeze. The kind of quiet that almost asks you to listen more carefully. Ethan sat on a blanket in the backyard, chasing bubbles with determined little hands. Every time one burst before he could catch it, he'd laugh as though losing was simply another way to play. I watched him from the porch, with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. Somewhere between his laughter and the sound of birds in the pine trees, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about responsibility. There was a difference. One sought satisfaction, the other demanded wisdom. After breakfast, I decided to tackle a project I'd postponed for years, the attic. My parents had lived in the lake house for nearly 30 summers, and after they passed away, I never had the heart to sort through everything they'd left behind. Most of the boxes remained exactly where my father had stacked them. Dust covered nearly every surface. Old fishing poles leaned against one wall. Christmas decorations filled faded cardboard cartons. My mother's sewing machine sat beneath a white sheet. I smiled despite myself. She could turn an old pair of jeans into a quilt that lasted 20 years. Dad used to joke that she never threw away anything except bad ideas. Hours passed as I organized family photographs, school report cards, and dozens of handwritten recipe cards in my mother's elegant script. Then I found Claire's throat, a small cedar chest tucked behind an old bookcase. It had my name written across the lid, Claire. Nothing else. My heart began beating faster. Inside were several neatly arranged envelopes. Each one carried a handwritten label. For your wedding, for the day you become a mother, for the day you doubt yourself. At the bottom rested one final envelope. My father's handwriting looked slightly less steady, for the day someone betrays your trust. I sat down on the attic floor before opening it. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age. Dad had always preferred fountain pens, and the familiar blue ink instantly carried me back to childhood. The letter began simply. My dear Claire, if you're reading this, life has probably disappointed you in a way I hoped it never would. Already my eyes filled with tears. He continued. Money has a peculiar way of revealing character. It doesn't create selfishness, it exposes it. Success doesn't change people nearly as much as it removes the reasons they once hid who they were. I paused. Those words described Daniel more accurately than anything I'd heard on television or in board meetings. Further down the page, another sentence caught my attention. Never confuse revenge